Hey everyone, what is going on? I'm Matthew Oliver, and this is Stillwater Alchemy, the podcast, episode 14, Just Eat the Pizza. On today's podcast, we're going to be talking about how softening one's boundaries can lead to pleasurable results. So let's dive in, shall we? So we're going to go back to 2018, August. I believe Mars was retrograde in Aquarius, but regardless, I was in Paris for the month of August in 2018, and I was living my best life. I was studying French and eating everything that I desired. I was probably walking like minimum 2 hours a day because I was just so enthralled. Paris is my favorite city. It's just so beautiful. It's like a Venusian's heaven. And I was there to study French, and that was always a big goal of mine was to live in a city and study that language where it was pretty much like survival. There's not a lot of, aside from like touristy areas when you're shopping, like everyone speaks French all the time. Even when I got to that point, I was pretty intermediate with my study of French, and there were still times where people would look at me cockeyed and they had no idea what I was trying to say. But by the end of that month, I was very quite very quite proficient. So I was really happy with my results, and I just have an affinity for languages and I love traveling. So it all just worked. However, when I got back to Toronto, I remember trying to like recapture a little bit of that magic, and I'd go to like the best bakeries and the best cafes to try and find croissants, and it just wasn't happening. I'm like, it's okay. Paris is always there. We can go back. And I would notice that. I don't know if it was just something in terms of the health astrology being activated in my chart at that time, or just my body shifting into a different timeline, but gluten would literally make my skin break out. We're talking like massive red welts all over my body, like my arms, my back. And I would talk to some of my friends who were in holistic nutrition. They were saying that leaky gut, gluten sensitivities are very real, and what's put into our food and how it's processed can really affect your body. So at that point, I just cut out gluten completely from my diet, and then all of those giant red welts would go away. And it wasn't the fact they're just like giant red welts and they would just almost look like underground acne. It was the fact that they wouldn't go away, and that when they did start to recede, there would still be these dark red marks all over my body. So it's just fascinating how certain ingredients in our food, certain energy, affect our body so viscerally, right? And our body is always telling us what's good and what's not. But sometimes not being able to eat gluten can be very restrictive, or being very diligent about that. Sometimes you just want a treat, or sometimes you just want something that has gluten in it. So remember, this is all starting in 2018 that I was like, okay, let's cut out gluten. And then shortly thereafter, I was already pretty much vegetarian. And then I went full on vegan. And then I noticed that even certain legumes and lentils would really upset my stomach. Like hummus was just game over. And so it was just so many things where I was like, okay, I cut out gluten. And then I would cut out dairy when I was vegan, and then no meat. It got to a point where I was like, my body was just very in need of certain things in order to function. So halfway through the pandemic, probably like 2021, 2022, I started introducing like fish and chicken back into my diet, and I felt significantly better because there were just times where my body was rejecting soy, rejecting legumes, and I wasn't eating gluten. And so there was so many restrictions that were so hard on my body that it was just too much. And part of my identity was around being vegan. I was posting vegan recipes. I was very ingrained in that mindset of like, this is the right thing to do. But my body was very much telling me this is not right. You cannot function. Like there are times where I had such low energy because of so many restrictions that I had. And again, when I would try eating a little bit of gluten, same thing, like my stomach would be irritable, my skin would flare up. So it was just one of these things I had to experiment with quite a long time until I found a pattern that worked for me. Plus, my six whole sign house is ruled by Gemini. So if you know, you know. Lots of adaptability, lots of experimentation, lots of curiosity going on with regards to my physical health. But then let's fast forward to 2024. At this point, I'm still not eating gluten because that period where my skin was flaring up, was very, very traumatic. Like someone who is a devotee of Venus takes pride in having beautiful skin. Having all of these welts all over your body is a lot, and it feels like you can't, like, no matter what product you use or what you try to do to offset it in diets or supplements, like they're still there. Especially when you're like at the gym and you have all these giant welts all over your arms. Like it's not a cute look. And so now what? It's been like 6, 7 years where I haven't eaten gluten at all. I've now introduced a little bit of meat back into my diet. And there was one week in December, so it's just a couple months ago from the time of me recording this, that I just was so desperate for pizza. Like my body was screaming for it. I was like, okay, let's just order some pizza. So I like got on Uber Eats, found this like really high-end pizza place, good reviews, got gluten-free crust, got vegan cheese. At this point, I'm still not eating cheese at all. Because I also noticed, back this up a little bit, that when I was eating dairy before I went vegetarian or vegan, pardon me, that I would get like these underground acne like all over my jawline. And then as soon as I stopped eating dairy, it went away. So again, it was like gluten was affecting my body, dairy was affecting my face. I'm like, let's just cut all of this out, which is why at first veganism was very alluring because it just helped me concentrate everything and allowed me to be very militant. But again, like I said, those boundaries needed to be amended when my body was literally screaming that it needed animal-based products to get those nutrients into me. So fast forward again now to December. I ordered these bougie pizzas, gluten-free, vegan cheese. I literally, before I recorded this podcast, I looked at the receipt and it was $85 for two 18-inch pizzas after like delivery fees, tip, add-ons, blah, 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 which is like kind of a lot for two pizzas. And they were big, obviously 18 inches. And the point is that I wanted to have like pizza to satisfy this intense craving on the day, and then also to have like lunch and dinner for the next couple of days. Because this was just a period where I was working nonstop right before the holidays. And this is a very, very true story. It was the worst pizza I've ever had in my entire life. I was so sad. I was trying to recapture this like one pizza that I had when I was younger. My family would go to this Polish pizzeria, this Polish deli back in Saskatoon, and it had like the best pizzas. It was just kind of like all dressed, everything on there. And I was so sad, you guys. I couldn't even finish the one pizza because the vegan cheese, it must have been Daya, and this is no shade to Daya, but just like so overpowering. And my stomach was hurting while eating this pizza. And I was like, I was trying and I just couldn't eat. I tried eating the other one the next day. No, it was also bad. I was like, I cannot eat this pizza. It's so disgusting. So then something in me just clicked. I'm like, let's just try ordering a pizza that you really want to actually eat. Just be mindful of like, yes, you might break out. Like you might break out over your body, over your jaw. Like just let's try getting a gluten crust. Let's try getting real cheese and see how your body reacts. And so if you know me, you know I'm very intuitively inspired and intuitively led. I have Neptune in my first house. So a lot of things that I do, I'm like, okay, does this feel good? Yes or no? And I found this one place on Uber Eats in Toronto. It had Rose in the name. I was like, hey, Venus, thank you for sending me a sign. And it was like the Rose's Deluxe Pizza. That's literally what it was called. And this was literally the exact pizza that I wanted. It was all dressed, it had everything on there. And to this day, because I went down like a pizza obsession over the holidays. Like pizza every week. Because once I had this pizza and my skin was fine, like my stomach was not upset. My body did not break out. I was like, oh, so maybe I'm in because I'm in a Venus ruled year this year biannual perfection, or things have shifted, or it's just like something in me has changed, but nothing is being affected in that way. And I was like, this is incredible. I can now have this one pizza that my body was literally screaming for, that it wanted so desperately, that I was able to just soften these really strict boundaries I've had for like 6, 7 years. Like all my close friends will tell you, like they always ask, what are your food restrictions? What diet are you on now? Because I always shift different things to one, just be naturally curious about my body and how it works with regards to nutrition. Two, I have a master's degree in sports nutrition. And so I'm always just fascinated with expanding that knowledge and wanting to see how the body will react at different phases, especially if we're linking it to health astrology, which is another field of astrology that's really fascinating to me. And then last of all, things do change. And to have this fixed mindset that I can never do this again. Maybe. However, there might be times in life, especially when the body, the feminine, is yearning and is screaming for something, especially when in my situation here with regards to my health, I was doing quote unquote everything right. I like went to one of the best pizza places. I got a gluten-free crust. I got vegan cheese and it was still awful. Like my body was rejecting this, even though I was trying to do everything quote unquote right, versus when I just ordered and experimented with what I was intuitively channeling, right? Like this childhood comfort and that emotional grounding that can come from food, right? The food, the body, the home, the family, all very strongly connected to the moon. And so when I was able to find this pizza, I was like, I'm ordering all the pizza. And I was actually talking to a client about this at the time. I was like, none of this is real. Just do what makes you happy. Your body is literally going to tell you what it wants, who it wants, what is aligned, what is not aligned, right? And so then I just was like going to all these different pizza places that I would never dare to order from before because of my strict dietary regime. And like I said, I was ordering pizza pretty much every week, sometimes twice a week, because I was just in this euphoric state of like, oh, I can eat pizza again and not have such a visceral negative reaction like I did in the past. And now it's kind of calmed down now that we're, what, this is mid-February as I'm recording this. So it's a lot better. But I'm so grateful I got to have that experience of it's okay. Now my body has changed and shifted that I don't have to be so fearful of eating gluten and dairy. I will still say, I kind of experimented this a little bit more that usually the pizza cheese is mozzarella. So that seems to be fine for me. But then when I had blue cheese on like a different salad a couple weeks ago, my body was not having it. I was like, okay, I'm still in a state where I don't eat gluten. I hardly eat dairy because it's just so much easier on a day-to-day basis for me. And I've already, like I said, been spending 7 years in this mindset. But I will say it's nice to know that on the occasional treat, it's not going to destroy me. That I have this comfort food quite literally as a way to help me ground back into my body. Because there's so many people that will ask me, like, how do I get grounded? How do I get grounded? How do I get grounded? Well, food is an earth element. Your body is also an earth element. So if we're adding positive earth energy to an earth energy, it's going to duplicate the positive benefits of the earth energy, the earth element, right? And so that's why the whole notion of like having a picnic is probably so desirable. You're sitting on earth energy, you're eating earth energy to support an earth vessel, earth energy. It's just like earth, 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 right? And so if our body's telling us, I do not want to eat this, this tastes disgusting, it doesn't even matter if it's with a good intent or we're trying to do everything right. Your body's going to tell you, the feminine is going to tell you who and what is safe, right? And so by allowing these boundaries, especially if they're boundaries that come from the mind, right? That you've decided to keep you safe. Like in my mind, it was to keep my skin safe from this inflammation. And I mentioned before that I'm still of a mindset that we have to be very careful of what we are consuming each and every day, whether it be from the air element, news, social media, from the earth element, the food, from the water element, what we drink every single day, right? We have to be very, very conscious of that. But I will say that and you can all reflect upon this after you finish this episode. If there was a time where you were able to soften your boundaries due to strong intuitive downloads, which led to a very, very positive outcome that you wouldn't have had you not softened those boundaries. A lot of times this will come in relationships. So maybe you had a falling out or you broke up with someone, whether it be family, lovers, friends, whomever. And then you feel inclined to reach out to them. Maybe you're like, I'll never talk to them again. Then something inside of you keeps pulling you back. Now, of course, this can also be very tricky to decipher and to understand. It's like, do I need to, is this actually going to serve a higher purpose? Or is this because I am lonely or because of my ego, right? And that was, again, this can be in related to anything where you have a very strong boundary. It's up to you to decide, is softening this boundary actually of benefit to me right now? Is this something that I really fully feel is going to benefit me in this moment? And your body will tell you, especially if you're not doing it from ego. If you're not doing it from fear, you're doing it because something in you is so powerfully calling out to connect to a vibration, to an energy source. And I will say, this obviously is so much easier when you are clear-minded, when you are grounded and connected to your body, where you're not overly stimulated, stressed, anxious, exhausted. Because if you're overly stressed, anxious, exhausted, you're probably doing things and making decisions from a survival-based mindset. I am needing love. I am lonely. I want to reach out. I want to consume. Versus you're feeling great. You're feeling aligned. And there's just something in you that keeps calling you to a certain city, a certain opportunity, a certain relationship, a certain food. There is likely a reason for that. And this is just kind of like one last note on the pizza part. Right now, I'm like, I haven't ordered a pizza probably in like 2, 3 weeks. I'm like, I just needed to have that experience that I don't need to be so anxious and so fearful if I consume a little bit of gluten or a little bit of dairy. Because, like I said, there was a time where I was just so kind of traumatized from how my skin would flare up and react so poorly when I would eat certain types of food and also giving myself grace because there was a time where I was so definitive of certain diets and how I would alter food and how I would identify with being a vegan. Like so many people knew I was a vegan at one point. It was a big part of like my branding at the very beginning of Stillwater Alchemy of like me being vegan, me wanting to be as quote unquote pure as possible with what I consumed. And so giving myself that grace to change and to be malleable with how I consume energy has helped me a lot. And so then I reflect that back to you as you're listening to this. If there's something that you have been able to shift or to completely change, even if it meant an ego death, even if it meant overcoming a certain fear, what the freedom, what the positive was from that. And of course, you can counter that when you did something that maybe you knew wasn't in alignment with your boundaries, but you just wanted to push the boundaries and kind of want to not fight back with the universe per se, but sometimes you have to pull on the leash just to see what's good and what's not. And then when you have an experience maybe where you fall flat on your face, and it's like, right, that boundary was there for a reason. Let's go back and repair that proverbial fence so that I'm safe and protected moving forward. But I do, and this is just my own temperament, so you can take this if it resonates, but I do think that we have to knock some walls down at certain parts of our life because they're keeping us small, they're keeping us contained. And if we built that wall once before, we know how to build it back up very easily. But perhaps there's room for expansion. Perhaps there's room for a solarium. Perhaps there's room for a reading nook that if we didn't smash that wall down, if we didn't challenge that boundary, then we're not experiencing some more positive benefits to life. And this is coming from someone who has Saturn as their most dignified planet in their chart. I love boundaries. I love discipline. All of these things come naturally to me, but at the same time, it can hold me back from enjoying certain things or allowing myself to go into some unknown realms because I've set such harsh boundaries. So this is an energy that you can play with. One, of just looking at your own natal Saturn in terms of your relationship with boundaries and discipline. Two, where you've allowed yourself to amend a certain boundary and where it's allowed for more pleasure, more expansion, more ideas that have come in because you've allowed yourself to temper that boundary at that part of your life. And bonus points if you can go back into the transits that were happening at that point when you amended that boundary. Maybe it was dating outside of your normal scope of what you are quote unquote into. If it was shifting your diet, it was shifting how you make money, to go back and see if there was any strong transits to Saturn from one of the planets. And that might go over some of your heads at this point, which is completely fine. When I was on my pizza adventure, Venus was moving through Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. But I kind of like broke the dam of I was like, I cannot keep eating this gluten-free vegan cheese pizza anymore. That was in December. So I believe Venus would have been in Aquarius at that time. And then when she fully moved into Pisces is when I was eating all the pizza. And so Venus was co-present and conjunct Saturn in the sign of Pisces in my third house. So if we're looking at that from your community, your neighborhood, Venus brings pleasure. Venus is exalted in Pisces, and she's able to help soften those walls of Saturn. So that does make sense for me personally. And even if you want to go back to and look at January, when Venus was moving through Pisces, hitting Saturn in transit, was there anything that you were softening your boundaries around, just kind of as a retrospective Venus Saturn transit in play that allowed for more pleasure, that allowed for more expansion? And if so, and you feel called to let me know in the comments, I would love to hear it from an astrological research perspective, but also just for you to know that whenever Venus is in strong dignity, making a really good aspect to Saturn, that there might be opportunities to let more love in, to let more pleasure into your life, to know that there might be times where not being as strict, not being as Saturnine will actually lead to new experiences that will benefit you in the long run. So that's our episode for today. Thank you all for listening. I'm wishing you a beautiful day, and I'll talk to you soon. Mwah. Bye. Okay, also, I pulled up the app, Uber Eats. This is not sponsored by Uber Eats, but I'm not opposed to if they want to in the future. But the pizza place that I got the blessed pizza from in New York is called Rose's New York Pizza. And I'd literally been going to New York back and forth, November, December of 2024. So this is one of those things, because everyone always asks, like, what are signs? What are synchronicities? What does that mean? That Rose, of course, is strongly linked to Venus. And then New York is a city that I love. So if we're looking for the signs pointing us in the right direction, I'm like, oh, this is Rose's New York restaurant in my city that I currently reside in. That might be a good clue of Venus pointing me in the right direction to help me in that moment. So we all have those kind of signs and synchronicities. And if you so choose, it's an even greater green light to help you receive that love, that pleasure, that expansion. Okay? You got this.